Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch and my guest is Dan Flynn. Welcome, Dan.
Pleasure to be here, Gavin.
I hear that Port Phillip Bay, it's not the safest place in the world, and if you're out there in a catamaran, what can go wrong?
Well, this weekend was pretty tough off Frankston. The Fremantle doctor came in, the sea breeze, and my young son Daniel and I were out there, and we had an unexpected capsize, and our great plans to bring home a bit of a trophy turned into a very wet and sodden experience.
Okay, now a catamaran is not an easy boat to right, is it?
No, they're big. There's a big frame. When they're tipped over, you've got one hull about 9 feet above the other hull, and you've got to clamber aboard pretty quickly to stop the boat going upside down.
Okay, so is there some drill required? What's the preparation for sailing a catamaran?
Well, the preparation is to try and keep the boat flat, is the first thing, and trying to avoid unexpected tacks or jives, and that's what got us on the weekend. We had an unexpected tack. The sail was locked on, and we were on the wrong side of the boat, so it came on top of us.
Oh, so you sort of have to get out from under.
Get out from under, make sure that you're not tangled with ropes, communicate with each other, everyone's all right, that's the first thing. The second thing is let's get up and get this yellow rope underneath the deck to pull it back so that the mast sits on the water and doesn't go underneath.
Okay, so this is rehearsed?
This was our first ever capsize in 2 seasons, Gavin. You never want to rehearse these because they're cold, so you tend to avoid rehearsing.
Okay, and did you need some other help?
We got a bit of coaching from a rescue boat who the fellow from the rescue boat was keen to coach but not to hop in the water, so we had to sort it out ourselves.
Now that's a bit like life, isn't it? We've got people who kind of are in rescue boats or possible rescue boats. They can give advice but they don't want to get wet.
That's very true, and so yeah, nothing like being in the race and having to endure the hardships.
Okay, well there was some sort of newspaper capsizes during the week. We had a woman who was demanding an abortion. What's the story there, and what's the rescue boat that came?
Well, Gavin, late last week there was a 41-year-old pregnant woman who's carrying a perfectly healthy 26-week-old unborn child. She presented to the Royal Women's Hospital saying, I demand an abortion. I have one child already. That's causing me some difficulties. The father's not on the scene. I'm potentially suicidal. So that was the situation that was presented there. There were really a couple of rescue boats that pulled alongside her, Gavin. I think the first one was the Royal Women's Hospital termination review panel, which indicated that they wouldn't do the abortion because, in their words, it was too late, and the hospital indicated that it was too unpleasant for the doctors to perform.
Let's just stop there for a moment.
Certainly. Too
unpleasant for doctors to perform? I've never heard that before.
Well, that's the story that was reported, and I think what it shows us, Gavin, is that it's one thing for people to assert women's reproductive rights and all sorts of pro-choice euphemisms, but for those who actually have to do an abortion, it's a pretty harrowing experience.
Okay, so let's take the doctor's side for a moment. What are they doing?
Well, as was explained to this young mother, as she then later recounted to a journalist, the doctors told her that she would have to observe this abortion on an ultrasound screen. She would have to observe the baby's heart being injected with poison, and that would be very difficult for her, and that a funeral director would have to be engaged. She was also told there are really no doctors here who will do this. So that certainly was a rescue boat in terms of the child. There was another rescue boat that pulled alongside in terms of both the mother and child, I think, and that was a number of offers to provide financial and other support to the mother, offers to pay for the family to have a holiday, take some pressure off, and in fact to adopt the child. So, so far that baby is still alive. and I'm very aware of the contacts that have been made, and it's very encouraging.
That's a lovely story. But particularly the rescue boats that sort of came out of nowhere.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So there must be quite trauma and horror, not with the child and the mother in mind here, but those who are performing the abortion.
It's quite interesting, Gavin. These children are very well developed. They're fully developed at 26 weeks, and they're fully viable. To see, obviously to have a heart injected to dismember the child and so forth is incredibly traumatic for hospital staff.
Wow. Well, there's some information for our viewers to ponder.
Yes.
So thanks for the story about a boat capsizing and yeah. Now, you're a grandfather too, aren't you?
Yes, a brand new grandfather, a freshly minted grandfather, 2 months in. Okay,
so what were the feelings like when you were told there's a boy born?
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Yes, it's, you feel extremely youthful, excited, and you look forward to having a positive influence on the child's life.
So here you are, part of a growing family, first grandchild. Are you prepared for this, or what's going on?
Look, I don't think I am prepared, and I think initially we think, we're way too young for this, but then of course when the baby's born the focus shifts dramatically. It's all about the baby and what experiences we can offer the baby and the mum and dad.
Mm-hmm. So there's that support within the family, the rescue boat, so to speak, there will offer the help that you need.
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a name?
Jedediah.
Jedediah. Okay. Now, what's the history of that?
Look, it may have been to avoid using the name Daniel again. I'm Daniel, my son's Daniel. Jedediah's second name is Daniel. So I think anything that achieved that outcome of not having a third Daniel was probably a good one.
All right, well, we'll be back. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Dan Flynn, the Victorian State Director of the Australian Christian Lobby. Dan, we had an exciting start to our interview. We had a capsized catamaran and a rescue boat came along with some help. And then we had the article in The Age about the woman demanding an abortion and some rescue offers, and one was adoption. How's this adoption stuff playing out in our Victorian Parliament at the moment?
At the moment, there's consideration of adoption being permitted for same-sex couples. There's a bill currently before the Parliament that seeks to do two things. Firstly, to allow same-sex adoption, and secondly, to amend the Equal Opportunity Act to prevent groups like Catholic Care, faith-based adoption agencies, being able to discriminate on the grounds of sexual orientation.
Well, now, discriminate is interesting because they're being discriminated against having a conscience or a voice or
Well, I think that's absolutely right, Gavin, and even though Catholic Care is an organisation, it consists of people. So those people who may be forced under this change in legislation to have to facilitate an adoption to two men, for example, for whom that's against their conscience, are being greatly discriminated against, and we've certainly taken efforts to point that out to the government.
Okay. All right, so there's one form of discrimination to conscience. What else is happening? Something in schools?
Another item that is on the agenda, on the government's agenda, which we expect to see in the Parliament in November, is a bill to restrict the recruiting practices of faith-based schools and other organisations. Currently, a Jewish or a Christian or a Muslim school can choose their staff based on their faith or their ethos. The government's intention is to limit that so that a school may have to justify that it's an inherent requirement of being a Year 10 maths teacher that you have, say, the Christian faith for a Christian school. And that's going to be a matter that's going to cause some litigation. It's going to cause anxiety in schools and a great deal of unrest. So at the moment, a Muslim school can choose all Muslim staff, so can a Christian school, so can a Jewish school. And we think that that accords with the freedom of association, freedom of belief that's inherent in our Charter of Human Rights. And to change that is the state intruding unfairly on our freedom of association.
Very interesting state government. Now, what's happening with children in the state school system who might like to have a form of religious education?
Well, unfortunately, Gavin, what we've seen in recent days, recent weeks, is an announcement by the Education Minister that special religious instruction is going to be removed from being delivered during class time and essentially kicked into the long grass. In theory, it'll be delivered before school, after school, or at lunchtime, but in reality, it probably won't be delivered much at all because there's just simply not the resources in terms of staff to supervise that instruction. So this shifting of SRI out of school hours will destroy a model that's been functioning in Victorian state schools for probably 60 years.
Well, what's interesting was this particular Labor government said it wouldn't touch that program.
Well, it certainly didn't foreshadow any announcement in this regard. Before the election, they said they would continue to deliver SRI according to the legislation, and the then opposition leader Daniel Andrews was clear that if he was elected, he would enable special religious instruction to continue, providing parents wanted that for their children. So that's precisely now what's been lost. So it's very concerning that this issue wasn't debated before the election, and the lack of consultation with the stakeholders, with the Principals Association, with the providers of religious instruction and the parents has been completely absent.
Well, that's not a good sign, is it, on a behaviour within the present government?
And particularly when you consider, Gavin, that 30,000 children participate in this program at the moment in 2015, and the reason for that is that their parents have signed forms opting them into this education. So that's a lot of parents choosing this, and the decision simply doesn't reflect parent choice.
Okay, well, there's a lot happening in the month of November here in the state government. What else do you need to bring to our attention?
On the abortion front, there is going to be a bill about exclusion zones concerning abortion clinics and the distance at which people must stand away from an entrance to an abortion clinic on a day the abortion clinic is operating. Fiona Patten from the Sex Party had a bill a couple of months ago specifying a 150 metre radius from the entrance to abortion clinics, a radius within which people couldn't speak, pray, hand out a pamphlet. Now, that was an outrageous limitation of freedom of speech. 150 metres is 3 Olympic swimming pools either side of the entrance, and the ALP government has said to Fiona Patten, we'll do our own bill, and that bill was launched last week. Okay,
so we have a government who's taking the law into their own hands.
Well, we have a government with an ideological agenda, and that ideology is being pushed quite sharply, and it's concerning, I think, to Middle Australia, many people who would identify as ALP voters, who would identify with trade unions and identify with generally left, I suppose, left of political centre causes, would probably be shocked to see the agenda roll out in this quite strong take no prisoners way, and there's probably no clearer example than the possible shutting down of Centrecare's adoption agency.
Okay, well, we'll give some reflection during the break. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch and my guest is Dan Flynn. the Victorian State Director of the Australian Christian Lobby. Dan, we're looking at this very active month of November for the Victorian Government and other elements and points of view that need to be considered by our viewers. I'm just interested in this exclusion zone, and I was thinking during the break, we could apply the same legislation to a polling booth day, and we could exclude all parties, 6 Olympic-sized swimming pools away, so they can't address the issues of what their cause is.
Look, very well put, Gavin. It's a good analogy. The people who are outside the polling booth could give their information in the middle of Burke Street, but it's really not going to have the same effect because, it's near the polling booth where the information is relevant to the people who are making decisions. And so, just like people near a polling booth, about which there will be a small exclusion zone to allow people to enter, but in the same way, pro-life advocates should be able to speak to women who are considering an abortion. They should be able to speak to them on the basis of a consensual discussion. If they're not interested, they're not interested, but they should be able to be offered a pamphlet and given some information that might help their choice. Yes,
I think informing one is very important. And also some of the reflection in the newspapers is making out some of the people who approach these women who've had an unexpected pregnancy and want to terminate it as terrible, evil people, and yet they're like rescue boats.
Look, I think that's very true, Gavin. These people have been greatly misrepresented. I've certainly met a number of them, and they're very impressive people. I think they are the Mother Teresas of our age. They're on the front lines, and they regularly have women who accept their help, which is often as practical as financial, accommodation, baby clothes, those sorts of needs. And there are numerous babies that are born as a result of mothers making a decision at the time to choose life for their child.
And in fact, I think there's been some 300 children saved.
That is absolutely correct. There's 300 that they know of over the last 20 years, of which this pro-life advocacy has been happening. And it's important to bear in mind here, Gavin, we're not talking about anti-abortion protesters. We're talking about people who warmly engage with women, with very user-friendly type of pamphlets and informations, saying, look, it's not too late to change your mind, and what support do you need? And those who do this work wouldn't have any progress if they were actually harassing the women. So they're clearly not doing that.
Yes. And compassion, we lack compassion in our society at so many levels. And to have these offers of help by people who are giving time, sacrificing financial resources, and offering this to a young mother who's under other pressures because she's ill-informed.
I know one young mum, her name is Nancy, and Nancy approached the Croydon abortion clinic. She was under pressure from her partner, the father of the child, but decided to keep her appointment anyway. When she arrived at the clinic, a lady approached her and asked if she really wanted to have the abortion. She said she didn't, and great help was made available for her. She has a 4-year-old child named Ava, and I've met Ava and met Nancy, and those people are very grateful for the group who provide this information outside the clinics in Melbourne.
All right, now we were talking about you being a grandfather, so you've had this experiential joy of being a father and now a grandfather, and so many grandfathers that could have been denied this part of life, part of an expression of joy.
Well, that's absolutely true, and I think that there's a big ripple effect, there's a big grief effect, and people's financial or social or emotional conditions are not improved by having an abortion. It doesn't present, the silver bullet, and the ramifications are felt, right across the family, parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters, that loss, and particularly by the mother. So yeah, that's a reality.
All right. So this issue that's not often discussed, which is post-abortion trauma. I mean, here we are, two men. What do we know about these things?
Well, it's a good point. Wherever there's a mother, there's going to be a father to that child, and I think often the fathers are kept out of the discussion, and there are a number of men who are greatly traumatised by not having any input into this decision. There's probably a large cohort of men who have coerced abortions, and sadly, Gavin, we hear from a lot of these women's stories that if there was somebody who was supportive, they would have gone ahead and had the baby, and that's something very important for prospective fathers to consider.
Well, there's a challenge to those who are listening to the program. Dads, get some courage here and look at the input that you can make on this child, who is yours biologically.
Absolutely.
And let's look at the organisation that supports these infants that could be in the exclusion zone. What's going on there?
There's an organisation called the Helpers of God's Precious Infants, and they operate here in Melbourne. They have operated for 20 years, and these people are very sacrificial. So their work is very frontline work. Their pamphlets that I have seen, they were actually invited by the government over the last few weeks to make a submission in relation to the government's exclusion zone bill. So they have been treated with respect in that regard, and their work has been acknowledged in that regard. And their great work has been spoken about in Parliament over the last few weeks and highlighted. So that's an encouraging sign. And I must say, Gavin, we spoke earlier about the woman at the Royal Women's Hospital who was seeking an abortion. The group, the Helpers of God's Precious Infants, reached out to them as well to offer support.
Stories like that are just so encouraging, to know that there's this group or many men and women who are going to offer assistance, and we encourage others to come forward, really, don't we?
We do. Everyone can play their part, and if we support life in a number of different ways, everyone will do it a little differently. Perhaps it's just a letter to the editor. Perhaps it's a phone call to a member of Parliament. We can really change this culture.
Thank you, Dan. You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.